right. Appreciate that good singing. I see Brad Moser back there. Am I on? Hello, test. 1, 2. I'm on? I'm on. Okay, I'm on. Test, test, test. All right. Beautiful.
I don't like this anyway. I see Brad Moser back there. I'm assuming the rest of the family is somewhere around, and we're glad that you're here, but we're glad that you're here too. We appreciate you being present. You know, fame is something that is unique, and it's desired by a lot of people because, you know, everybody would. I was thinking about this the other day. That famous people are not the people that you see on NBC Today Show jumping up and down behind the camera. That's people that are not famous wanting to be famous. Famous people have paparazzi, and every thing that they do, every little thing that they do is amplified, and I couldn't imagine having that, really. You might, on one hand, think that fame would be a neat thing, but it gets to be a bother pretty quick, I would imagine. You know, and there are some people that are famous by appearance. There are some people that are famous by name. And there's some people that are famous by just one name, just a single name. Madonna, Prince, Zamfir. Some of you know who Zamfir is. Well, what about the people whose nickname they're famous by? Who is The Rock? All right. Dwayne Johnson. The Duke. John Wayne. Here's one that'll test your memories. The Fridge. William Perry, Refrigerator Perry. The King. Jesus. I'm disappointed in you. Now, I kind of set you up for that. Jesus is the King. So was Elvis, but Jesus is the King. And it's easy to forget who the King is sometimes. We could talk about that for a while, but we're going to talk about 1 Samuel, the book of 1 Samuel, really almost all of it. Chapters 1 through 4 and 8 through 10 and chapter 15, I know, are highlights. And this is the occasion when Israel got a king. But we want to talk about that king. It's King Saul. And let's go through a few of the things that starts in 1 Samuel 1 with Elkanah and his wife Hannah, and had another wife named Peninnah. Well, he loved Hannah a lot. And the Bible says when he sacrificed his food, he made his regular sacrifices, that Hannah got a double portion of meat. That doesn't sound like much, but it just indicates that he loved Hannah a lot. Well, so he gave her a double portion of meat. She was a wonderful person. They're all godly people. Hannah, though, had no children. She was barren. He told her one time, this is in verse 8, Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Well, now my mic has to work. All right, verse 8. Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't it mean more to you than 10 sons? And all the women in the world go, oh. Because he did mean a lot to her, but Elkanah just didn't get it, didn't get it. She is barren. She wants children. So Hannah prayed and prayed and prayed to God about it, and There's an occasion that's written about where she was in the temple praying, and Eli saw her, and he thought she was drunk because she was moving her lips and nothing was happening, and so he accused her of drinking too much. And that's not the case at all. Hannah was a very righteous woman, but God answered her prayers. You can imagine that wasn't the only prayer. She had probably been praying for years. But he answered her prayer, and Samuel was born, after whom the book is named. Well, she had agreed with God, or she had made a commitment to God that I'm going to bring him up in your service. I'm going to give him to you if you'll let me just have a son. But she had other children beyond that. But she did have a son. I would imagine, like the rest of us, she would probably have second thoughts about the commitment that she made. But the Bible doesn't say anything about that. She committed to give him to God's service. That's what she did. So when he was weaned, she took him and presented him to Eli. Eli was a priest at the time. And Samuel grew up under Eli. And Hannah went back home, and she would visit him and bring him gifts and things like that. So that's Elkanah and Hannah and Samuel. Well, many chapters later, you find out, this is like in chapter 4, Hophni and Phinehas were Eli's sons. And you would assume that he's a man of God, and so he's got control of his children, and he's got control of their lives and what's important to them. But you find out that that's not the case. Eli's sons were wicked. They were priests, but they were wicked. It just tells you how wicked they were in there. Well, on one occasion, they were in battle against the Philistines, and Hophni lost his life. And Phinehas lost his life. And they had taken the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant was stolen by the Philistines. And that was devastating news for everybody. And when Eli found out about it, a runner ran back to Shiloh where the ark was, and that's where Eli was too. He was kind of an old man at the time. And when he was told that Hophni had died and Phinehas had died, can you imagine how he felt? Can you imagine the intense emotion? But it says that when it was told that the Ark of the Covenant was stolen, Eli fell off the back of his chair and died. That was just devastating news. You know what the Ark of the Covenant was. And you know that they had taken it into battle, but they didn't check with God first. They didn't ask God about that. Well, at least 20 years, probably a lot more than that, of time passed. And in the meantime, this is around chapters 9, 10, 11, the Ark of the Covenant was returned to Israel. And Samuel has been a prophet and a priest and a judge for Israel. And in chapter 8, it says this: when Samuel grew old, he had appointed his sons as judges for Israel. This is Samuel now. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You're old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." So the people kind of rejected Samuel. He's old and decrepit, and he's not really able to function that well. And his sons, he figures they're doing their work, but his sons were evil too. And so they said, "We want a king like everybody else." This is where the kingship came in. Well, that disturbed Samuel a lot. Disturbed him greatly, because God was supposed to be their king. And he has served them well throughout the years. You know the stories of how they got out of Egypt and how they were on Mount Sinai, and all the different stories that they had. For years, they had defeated Jericho and Ai, and it's just amazing how many times they won battles when they were following God. Samuel wanted to talk to God about it, but they refused. They said, no, we want a king. We want to be like everybody else. So in chapter 10, now verse 17, Samuel summoned the people of Israel to the Lord at Mizpah and said to them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel up out of Egypt, and I delivered you from the power of Egypt and all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But you have now rejected your God, who saves you out of all your calamities and distress. And you said, no, set a king over us. So now present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans. When Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel near, the tribe of Benjamin was chosen. Then he brought forth the tribes of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was chosen. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was chosen. But when they looked for him, he wasn't to be found. Where's Saul? I mean, he had been tipped off, and he knew that God was going to appoint him. And they go through this whole process of, we're choosing Benjamin. Out of the 12 tribes of Israel, we're choosing Benjamin. And then he's going on down in Matri's clan, and then his family. But Saul's nowhere to be found. Verse 22, they inquired further of the Lord, has the man come here yet? And the Lord said, yes, he's hidden himself among the baggage. They ran and brought him out. As he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. Samuel said to all the people, do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people. Then the people shouted, long live the king. Samuel explained to the people the regulations of kingship. He wrote them down on a scroll and deposited it before the Lord. Then Samuel dismissed the people, each to his own home. Well, this is the occasion when he was actually selected. And I wanted to bring this up because Saul was as good a man as you could find anywhere. That's point number one. Saul was as good a man as you could find. He was taller than everyone, but he was an humble person. In fact, over in chapter 15, verse 17, Samuel said, although you were once small in your own eyes, that's the way he viewed himself. He wasn't a boisterous person, wasn't a proud person. He was humble, and so humble that he didn't even show up for his own crowning. But now we fast forward to chapter 13. And a lot's transpired, and I would encourage you to read all that. But for our purposes of the story today, verse 5 says, the Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Bethaven. When the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical, that the army was hard pressed, they hid in caves and thickets, among rocks and pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilead, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. So Israel's on the run. They're petrified. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel. Samuel had told him, wait 7 days and I'll come. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. What have you done? Asked Samuel. Saul replied, when I saw that the men were scattering and that you did not come at the set time and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I will have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering. So Saul offered the sacrifices. Well, God went through a long process
of selecting Levi and his tribe, his clan. And he wrote the book of Leviticus, and he specified a lot of things for the Levites to take care of and to do, and clothes that they wear, sacrifices that they were to offer. The Levitical priesthood was a big deal. Saul circumvented all that. So Saul's opinion is not as good as God's. Saul's opinion, and not ours either, isn't as good as God. Listen to what Samuel says to him in verse 13. You acted foolishly, says Samuel. You have not kept the commands the Lord God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him leader of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's commands. Well, imagine Saul. He's leading the army, and the army is hiding in ditches and hiding in cisterns and scattered all over the countryside, and he's not able to hold them together. He realizes that they have not sought the Lord's favor. And so what does he do? What he shouldn't have done. Saul's a good man. He is a good man. But the power of the kingship is starting to get to him. And he's thinking when he should be believing. He's thinking when he should be praying. And he's thinking, or his opinion took him. Now, the people defeated the Philistines. But Saul's opinion is what drove it. Saul's opinion, in the church even these days, my opinion may carry some weight, or the elders' opinions, or the deacons' opinions, or your teachers, or whatever. We have opinions too. But they're not as good as God's knowledge. God specifies what he wants from us, and he did like he did with Saul. And it's up to us to fulfill what he says and then wait on him. We don't like silence, do we? We don't like silence. We're having a conversation with somebody, or we're teaching a class, for instance, and you'll ask a question, and the crowd doesn't respond right away. What do you do? Some people answer the question because we can't stand that silence. And it's, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. 15 seconds, how long is that? It's not very long at all, is it? It seems like an eternity. But we fill the space. And sometimes the space between, when we are waiting for God to do what he's going to do, we just fill that space with something. And it's the wrong thing often, most of the time. Then let's continue reading and see what happens in the battle against the Amalekites. 1 Samuel 15, chapter 15. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them to Telem, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, go away, leave the Amalekites, so that I do not destroy you along with them. For you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites moved away from the Amalekites. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, to the east of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep. Agag is the king. And the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. Everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely. But everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. Human reasoning, even the best human reasoning, isn't the same as obedience. He was told, destroy all living things. and don't take any of that for yourself. But he didn't do that exactly. They destroyed all the people, but he kept King Agag. And they destroyed all the animals and whatever, but they kept the choice for themselves. Saul used good judgment. I mean, what sense does it make to destroy something that's good? This doesn't make any sense, does it? Not at all. It doesn't have to. It's not supposed to make sense to us in human reasoning. And for Saul, it didn't make sense because he's losing his kingdom. His thoughts he took as intelligent. I mean, I'm the king. I must be wise, or he wouldn't have picked me. And we could reason a lot of things. Or we have an education, we have a doctorate, or whatever it is. Or I've been in the business for 20 years, or whatever. But that's not the same as obedience. And Saul became arrogant. In chapter 15, verse 22, but Samuel replied, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord?" Think about that a little while. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices? Well, he did, didn't he? He does, doesn't he? Yes, I think is the answer to that question. But he says to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. If you have to pick between, making a perfect sacrifice or obeying God, which one are you going to pick? Well, we've got to obey God. We have to obey God. We have to obey God. Verse 23 says, "For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry." If you ask Saul, are you an idolater? What would he answer? There's no way. There's no way. If I ask you, what would you answer? You'd say there's no way. I'm not going to worship some carving or some brazen image or something like that. That's just ridiculous. But God says to Saul, arrogance is like the evil of idolatry. And so Saul became arrogant, and his pride overtook his reasoning ability, or his faith at least. And so God equated his arrogance with rebellion. And you notice the word divination. That's divining. That's like seeking somebody else's help for things. And God did not accept it and rejected Saul. Verse 13 says, "When Samuel reached him, Saul said, 'The Lord bless you.'" Saul said, "The Lord bless you. I carried out the Lord's instructions." But Samuel said, "What then is the bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear?" Saul answered, "The soldiers brought them in from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord, your God, but we totally destroyed the rest." So what is Saul actually saying? That 99% obedience is okay. It's not okay. Because 1% or 10% or whatever is not obeying God is a problem. And Saul would have worshipped God, and he would have said that God was his worship being, that he was, faithful to God. But he was not faithful to God. Saul couldn't admit that he was wrong. And the situation that he found himself in was his fault. Saul had confused success with endorsement. Because, see, they beat the Philistines, they beat the Amalekites. And Saul was regarded as a hero, except he didn't obey God. And sometimes we can maybe be successful. Maybe we make a lot of money, or maybe we have power or prestige that's granted to us by, our peers. And that's not really the question. Your success doesn't equal endorsement. There's a lot of big churches, a lot bigger than ours. And they're right here in Lakeland, or they're in Orlando. And I don't think we should take pride that we're small. That's not my point. We need to grow and be, more noticeable. But we also shouldn't take we shouldn't be confused with our successes either. Success doesn't necessarily mean endorsement. You remember Jonah, don't you? Jonah was a preacher, prophet, and Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of the whale, or great fish. Somebody said that he went to an evangelism seminar when he was in the belly of the whale, and he was spit out, and he had 7 words. He had a terrible attitude, and all the people responded. All of them. They sang the invitation. Everybody came forward. He was successful in his mission, but he was unsuccessful as an individual. God taught him that lesson. So our success or failure in human terms might not be success or failure in God's terms. So the Amalekites were gone. Success had been achieved with God's assistance, but not because of Saul. It was in spite of Saul. God turned his back on Saul because Saul had turned his back on God. That's the bottom line. He left him in as king a long time after that. He was king for 43 years. That's a pretty long time. When we pray for something, we have learned a hope in this process that God always hears your prayers and he'll always answer your prayers, but he won't always fix the situation you're in. He won't always fix it. Saul became an evil man. David was the man that God had chosen. David was a king from the time he was 12. But he didn't announce it. He didn't announce it when he was in the palace with the king. And he didn't announce it when he was running through the wilderness and living in caves when Saul was chasing him. When he had a chance to kill Saul. But he waited on God's timing to produce the proper results. And that really is the lesson for today. That God can take whatever the situation and he can wind it around and work it around to produce his results. Now, Saul was the king, but Saul's sons were not, because God kicked them all out of the kingship. And he brought a new king in, David. And David was from the tribe of Judah. And so was Jesus. So Jesus is the king, the real king. I wonder if he's your king this morning, and if he's mine. I wonder if, like Saul, maybe we say it, but in actuality, we don't really do it. We say that he's going to be Lord of my life. I wonder how much of our lives we take. Maybe 10%, maybe 15%. I mean, he gets the big majority, but that's not what being Lord is. Jesus is the king. I want him to be my king. I want him to be my king. I want him to be your king too. And if he's not, please come forward as we stand and sing.